Hello and welcome back to the third video for this Concept Assignment 10 outline. In the second video, we started on this outline 5 document and we got through query number 20. So we're going to start with query 21. So with query 21, it asks us, consider the groups of products where each group contains the products that are from the same category supplied by the same vendor and whose product price is $50 or higher. So the same vendor and category, we need to do a group by. So that's where we got the group by here. And we're looking for a product price of $50 or higher. So that's where the product price is greater than or equal to 50. And we want also for each such group that has more than one product, retrieve the vendor ID, this one, the product category ID, the number of products in the group, and the average. That's where we got all this in their output with the select clause. Now they have to have at least one, greater than one product. So that's for each group. So that's why we have this having count for every record greater than one based on this grouping here. So you can think of the having clause as the criteria or condition for the group, and the where is the condition for this particular output that you want from this table here. Once you run it, you should get something like this. Be sure to save it as query 21. For query 22, we're looking for each product that has more than 3 items sold within all sales transactions. And we would find that information here in the number of items and retrieve the product ID value and the total number of product items sold. So the total number of product items, we would use a sum there. So that's the reason why it's here, and we're also going to do a sum for that group as well. And then all the information is in the sold via. So I've got listed on the screen here the sold via table and its data here. So when you look at this, if we group by product ID, so all the product IDs, then I need to sum these values for the same group. That's what this query is doing. And so we can see that the only ones that once the sum is greater than 3 is the 3x3s. See, they have a 5 there, but there's only one 3x3. And that 4x4, there's 2 4x4s, but there's actually 5 total. So there's where that 5 comes from. So you have to understand your data in order to build these queries. For query 23, we're looking at for each product that was sold in more than one sales transaction, retrieve the product ID value and the number of sales transactions in which the product was sold. So we're going to select the product ID, but we're going to count the records, but we're going to group by product ID. So as long as there's more than one record in a grouping of product IDs, then we want to display that product ID in the count. Count just counts the records. It's not summing the values in the cells. So count is then going to just retrieve the number of transactions. That would be the number of transactions because it was a record that was entered into the database. On 24, it asks you for each product that has more than 3 items sold within all sales transactions, retrieve the product ID value. So the product ID then is what you want as your output. Select from sold via. Again, we're going to group by product ID, but this time we want to sum the number of items, that field, that value there, and if it's greater than 3, then produce this output. And so here's the result you should get. In 25, it asks you for each product that was sold in more than one sales transaction, retrieve the product ID. Again, in order to determine the number of transactions, we're looking for count the records where it's greater than one. We're going to group on product ID. And if it's greater than one, we want to select the product ID for our output from this table. On query 26, we're going to change tables here. It says for each product whose product price is below the average price of all products, retrieve the product ID, product name, and product price. So that becomes select these fields from, we know that these fields are in the table product, where the product price, that is the data that's in that field, that particular record, is less than, and we are doing a subquery here, select average product price from product. So that's going to retrieve a value. That's the result. That result then is used to being compared with the current product price. So remember, this is the inner query, this is the outer query. So this is a nested query, if you will. And like I said at the very first video, when you have something like that, it's typically the inner query will pass results to the outer query. So it's used to make some kind of comparison or be another table to look in for some kind of comparison. So in query 27, this is a little more difficult nested query, if you will. So it asks for each product that has more than 3 items sold within all sales transactions, retrieve the product ID, product name, and product price. So here we're going to use the keyword in. So select product ID from sold video, group by product ID, when the sum of the known number of items is greater than 3. So it's going to list a list of product IDs that have greater than 3. Then it's going to look from this outer query, it's going to use the product table and then the product ID data to see if that exists in this result back. If it does, then it's going to produce product ID, product name, product price. And so if you're truly interested in learning about these queries, then you try doing this outer or inner query first, see what it produces, and then see what is a match from the product table. So I've typed that outer, or I shouldn't say outer, the inner query here in, just so you can see what it would look like for query 27. And you see it just listed those 2 values. Well, when we look at this, that's what's being compared here, where product ID in, and you saw what that output was from this particular code here. If it's in there, then it's going to return that. But it's going to also give me these other 2, product name and product price. So we get this result here. So now I've got the outer query here, so select this where product in, and then to make this work, I have to put the parentheses there because that's all part of the in. Closing parentheses here, and that's what you've got typed in your document. So when I run it, then I get the same output as what you see on the screen. Okay, so that's a way of breaking it down so you can understand what these queries are doing if you don't know how to write them from scratch. So query 28 is another nested query. And here's what we want. We want for each product whose items were sold in more than one sales transaction, retrieve the product ID, product name, and product price. So very similar to the last one, except now we're going to have a count the records that are greater than one, more than one sales transaction. And the result should be the following. All right, so now we're going to move to where we can retrieve data from multiple tables to create a view. If you'll recall, in the very beginning of the semester, we said views were queries. Well, this particular view is combining data from multiple tables. So let's read what it's asking for. For each product, retrieve the product ID, name of the product, name of the vendor of the product, and price of the product. So we're going to select product ID, product name, vendor name, or product price from, and here we're getting that information from two tables, product and vendor, where the product, that's the table name, we're qualifying this now because we're using more than one table, dot vendor ID is equal to vendor dot vendor ID. So I've opened up the relationship diagram and notice that in that query we're using product and vendor. Now from there we're also pulling vendor name from vendor. Vendor name doesn't list in the product table, so that's the reason why we need to link them. And we link them on the vendor.vendor ID equals the product.vendor ID over here. So when we look at that code, that's where this is coming from. Now ideally, these field names should have been qualified with the table name in front and then a period after each, especially this vendor name. But because neither of these field names are used in another table, then it knows it can pick them out of the table that it's coming from once the link is made. So you can think of this link here, when this where is like a little pointer. If we could align the tables up together with the data, when there's a match, then it would pull this information, and this information from the appropriate tables and put that out as a record. That's what you see here. Now here we have the results of, if we did the select product ID, product name, vendor name, product price from product and vendor, this is the output. So it's listing a lot more data because it wasn't joined. It's just combining the data. So I want to just point out something. In query 29, we link the tables. So when we link the tables, if we look at there are 6 records here, and they all include this information from the product table, and the only thing that's coming from the other table, the vendor table, is the vendor name. So if we look at these 6 records here, what we're doing is we're pulling those records and we want to know what's the vendor name for this vendor ID. So that's why there's only 6 records in query 29. But in query 30, we're not linking them. It just combined, here's the first 6 records, and then it put the vendor name out to the side. Here's the next 6 records, and then it put the second vendor name out to the side. Because in the vendor table, there's only 2 records, right? So that's why it just doubled the amount of records from the product table. So you need to be careful about when to link them, when to not link them. And what the results will be when you don't link your tables. So here we're doing it the old-fashioned way, using a where clause to make a link based on the different field names in the different tables. For query 31, we say select star from product vendor. Here it's going to combine all the columns from each table. So here's the vendor ID from the product table. Here's the vendor ID from the vendor table. So you can see all that just duplicated again. Now maybe that's what you want, but chances are it may not be. The last query I want you to do and save is this query 32. Select everything asterisk from product and vendor. So that's all columns from product and vendor, where there is a link on product.vendor_id equals vendor.vendor ID. And now you see you just get the 6 records again. You do get the output of the 2 vendor ID columns from each of the different tables, but now you get the vendor name out here as well. And so that ends this small overview of SQL. If you want to learn more, I would suggest that you can take a SQL class somewhere, probably online through one of the companies that offer MOOCs. My personal preference is probably to use edX, but I know some people have used Udemy. But if you'll just go to edX.com or udemy.com, you should be able to find those different courses on SQL. So here I've gone to udemy.com. I'm just look for SQL courses. And you can see a SQL Bootcamp. Looks like they're having a sale right now. And there's all kinds of places you can go to learn more about SQL. And that ends this overview of SQL for Concept Assignment 10.